Hey guys, tonight we step softly through the iron gates of an imposing Victorian manor. Darkness still clings to everything. The cobblestones shine with yesterday's downpour, the oil lamps flicker, and you can see your own breath clouding the frigid dawn air. Nobody pays you any mind. Not the dairy wagon rumbling past, not the gentleman in his silk hat rushing to make the morning train. You're only the staff naturally, and it's scarcely past 5. You approach the rear entrance, never the main door, obviously. Your shoes scrape quietly on the stones, your skirt edges soaked with morning moisture as you grasp the metal knocker polished down by countless other young women before you. The door groans open from within. The kitchen maid, barely half your years and already teary from chopping onions, acknowledges you and moves away. No speech, just a handoff of responsibility, like passing flame. You drape your wrap on the same bent hook daily, slip your hands into your apron pouch, and draw one long breath. The household still dreams, but that privilege isn't yours. You glide quickly through the cooking space, still radiating from yesterday's coal embers, and into the cramped corridor. First task, rouse. The fireplaces, every single one. There are 5 on the ground level by itself, each requiring ashes removed, new coal hauled from the wet outer shed, and kindling nursed to flame with frozen fingers. It's not impressive work, but it's critical, because if the hearths aren't blazing by the time the mistress descends, someone's position is at risk, potentially yours. So you rush. Your lungs catch with coal powder as you haul the massive bucket across the stone floors, mindful not to mark them. In the sitting room, you crouch like someone in prayer before the grate, hands darkened before dawn even breaks. The expensive velvet seating and burnished cabinets speak of fortune, but down here on your knees, all you witness is ash, cobwebs, and the small rodent skull somebody abandoned. The coal container, lovely! By the time the initial fire pops, your spine throbs and your face burns from warmth and frost equally. You continue to the library fireplace, the breakfast room, the gentleman's study, where you resist peeking at the open account book left on his writing table showing household costs down to the smallest coin. Your name isn't listed naturally, just kitchen staff monthly. You're still working when you detect the subtle chime. The upstairs servant has begun. Shortly the rest will follow, one for shoes, one for laundering, another for pressing. You are all mechanisms in the same groaning apparatus, but nobody beyond ever witnesses it. They witness the gleaming silverware at supper, the plumed bonnets at the theatre, the cut flowers in the reception room, not the young woman who clipped the stalks with chilled hands. At 6 in the morning, and as you transport the ash container out to the side entrance, you peer up at the roofline where chimney stacks exhale grey smoke into a lightening sky. The town is stirring, but you've been awake for ages. Nobody will acknowledge you, nobody will see. But without you, the household doesn't function. You return inside just as the sun appears over the roofline, painting the upper curtains amber. But you won't be ascending those steps. You head directly for the scullery where the raw cold sticks to the stone like fungus. Your exhalation lingers in the space. The sink is already brimming with yesterday's hardened cookware, the brass pot hissing softly on the burner. Breakfast preparations started and there's no moment to stop. The cook shouts something about eggs and preserves and you acknowledge, not fully listening, already flexing your knuckles in preparation for the coming chore. You strip potatoes without watching. You've performed it so frequently, your hands operate independently. You don't need to focus, only maintain pace. Somebody knocks over the milk. The kitchen maid slides on it. Nobody utters a word. There's no space for checking if you're fine, only rags, hushed excuses and the swift pass of a brush before anyone with authority discovers. As the household stirs to existence, bells start ringing through the staff passages. One brief ring from the azure bedroom means the mistress requires hot water. 3 consecutively from the master's changing room means his shoes aren't yet shined. The bell arrangement may appear quaint to visitors, little brass indicators pointing to every room, but for you it's like wearing a collar. You don't stroll anywhere you're called, you dash to retrieve the hot water pitcher still steaming from the kettle. Up the tight servant steps you climb, shoulders angled precisely to prevent touching the wall covering. At the summit you pass a doorway, left partially open. You catch sight of the governess, already arranging lesson materials, her expression worn and empty, like a toy someone neglected to activate. When you step into the lady's bedroom, she doesn't acknowledge you. She simply raises her hand faintly, assuming you'll interpret the signal. Place the water down, part the drapes, adjust the trim of the lounging seat. Her tone, when it emerges, is quiet and sluggish. She's been conscious less than 10 minutes, and already she's weary of the day. You complete your duties and exit before she can discover problems. Below again, someone yelling about the feline, tracking dirty paw marks in the passage. It's ridiculous, really. How many bodies it requires to keep this household appearing like it operates smoothly. You steal a piece of bread when nobody's watching. That'll be the sole thing in your belly until nightfall, unless you chance the remaining oatmeal the youngsters didn't consume. You've attempted it previously. Everybody has. Nobody mentions it. By late morning, the household carries the scent of wax and stiffener. The surfaces shine, the glass panes glisten, and upstairs the mistress is browsing in her silk robe, taking tea from a cup you cleaned last evening. Visitors may be coming shortly, or perhaps the rector's spouse will visit. Regardless, the location must appear like nobody ever laboured here, as if the silver utensils clean themselves, as if the coals jump into the fireplace by enchantment. Beyond, a fresh young woman raps on the rear door, complexion gaunt, hands chapped, tone too quiet. You were her previously, and now you acknowledge her like a veteran soldier greeting a new enlistee to a conflict nobody admits is occurring. Because behind every shut entrance in this household, there is a woman labouring always. The washing room is positioned far in the rear, beyond the storage area, beyond the cleaning closet, through a timber door that complains every time you force it open. It carries the smell of moist fabric, chilled vapour and harsh soap, somewhat like remedy, somewhat like hopelessness. You enter inside, and the warmth strikes you like a barrier. Damp warmth, not comfortable warmth. Your flesh glistens with perspiration instantly, even though it's icy beyond. The large brass basin is already boiling. Somebody's been awake since before you. You acknowledge the laundress, hunched beside it, sleeves pushed up to the elbow, complexion crimson from vapour and exertion. She doesn't glance up. She's grappling with something weighty, probably bedsheets, probably one of those substantial tablecloths, with needlework so delicate you're not permitted to blink when folding it. Today is linen day. That means pillow slips, serviettes, undergarments and nightgowns. The stacks are already organised. You collect the basket labelled Delicates, Lady Clara. It's brimming with lace-edged undergarments, silk undershirts, and one especially daring corset you recognise she wears beneath her Sunday gown. You don't remark, you simply start. The soap burns your hands. You rotate the material gently, recalling that occasion last spring when you cleaned too vigorously and ripped the lace. You still haven't recovered from it. Every article has a procedure: boil the linens, hand rinse the silks, pound the woolens, extend the stockings over drying racks so they don't contort like expiring snakes. You don't possess gloves. Your hands wrinkle and flush. One fingernail is already cracked. Somebody previously stated laundry was women's battle. The opponent is infinite grime. The war zone is slick floors and boiling basins. And the prize? If you're fortunate, no objections. If you're unfortunate, your earnings reduced for a mark you didn't create. There's a pane in the washing room filmed with vapour. Beyond, the avenue is stirring delivery wagons, howling dogs. The meat seller's boy singing with his container. Inside, you're rinsing undergarments with rose water so they smell refined. Somebody spills stiffener. Another young woman sneezes repeatedly. Too much powder in the atmosphere. You chuckle weakly, collectively. A brief explosion of human sound quickly absorbed by the room's damp silence. You transfer to the wringer, turning the metal cylinders with your entire frame. The corset moves through, gradually compressing like a crushed blossom. You snag your sleeve once and pull back in time, but you recognize a young woman who forfeited the end of her finger to one of these. They never employed her again. There's a mound of gentlemen's collars in the angle, rigid ones, tall ones, white linen terrors that must be washed, whitened, pressed and starched into absolute obedience. One incorrect crease and the master's throat will irritate all day. He'll object. The objection will transform into your difficulty. Still, you advance. The brass hisses, the material splashes and your limbs hurt in that satisfying bone-deep manner that indicates you're still here, still labouring, still invisible. By afternoon, the genuine ordeal starts, the drying. The household doesn't trust you with a warming cabinet and the climate's terrible. No possibility of hanging linens beyond on the lawn, so you and the other young women string lines across the beams above the scullery, clipping sheets and undergarments where they'll drip onto the stone surface like slow, spectral streams. It carries the scent of soap and damp wool and something vaguely human perspiration that never genuinely departs. You crouch under the linens as you navigate, your head grazing against bloomers fluttering like banners in a tempest. It's nearly amusing, Somebody collides with you with a stack of damp petticoats whispering apologies. Her aprons saturate through. You accept too, simply to ease her burden, even though your own limbs are dead weight. There's no opportunity to pause, just the occasional instant when your hands are submerged and your mind can wander. You consider the woman who possessed these, about Lady Clara's giggle last evening at supper, about how she touched her lips with a serviette you starched this morning. You question if she understands how many hands contacted her garments before they ever reached her wardrobe. Above, the parlour-maid delivers down another container, this one with a small rip in one chemise. You exhale. Repair work, you position it aside for afterward. Nobody else will perform it, certainly not the mistress. She wouldn't consider mending a hem. That's your talent, your silent craftsmanship. Your name isn't stitched into anything, but your labour is present. The vapour intensifies. You start to experience a bit lightheaded, so you part the rear door for a gulp of atmosphere. Chill strikes you like a blow. Across the passageway, the neighbour's washing young woman is wringing out a carpet with her bare feet in a pail. She notices you and smiles. You smile back. You're not isolated in this. There's a complete battalion of women laundering the Empire's linens, beyond sight and beyond gratitude. Afterward, when the linens are mostly parched, you start ironing. The massive black irons must be warmed on the burner, and if you're negligent, they leave burn marks. Brown shadows that don't rinse out. You examine each one by hovering your hand above it, just near enough to singe your palm. If you miscalculate, it's always a risk. As you press out the final wrinkles in a table runner embroidered with forget-me-nots, you question who stitched them. Some other servant? A young woman in a schoolroom? A sister in a convent? Or maybe a woman like you, pressing her soul into small, beautiful things nobody will ever witness being crafted. And then the chime rings again. You wipe your hands. Laundry will remain, it always does, because there's additional work behind additional doors, and you're anticipated to know precisely where to be, precisely when. And so you proceed. You abandon the vapour behind, but the warmth stays with you, in your hair, in your chest, in the curl of your fingers. Laundry day never concludes. It only conceals itself, folded, starched and flawless. You perch on a low stool in the attic workroom, a blunt needle gripped between your fingers and a mountain of silk beside you. The sun penetrates through the high, dusty pane in weak beams, catching on tiny particles of lint and thread drifting like ash. There's barely space to extend your legs. The seamstress's table is packed with bundles of incomplete sleeves, tangled bobbins and pins inserted into a partially used bar of soap. This is where the wonder occurs, though nobody calls it that. You've been labouring on Lady Clara's new reception gown for 3 weeks now. Pale azure silk taffeta with scalloped trim, hand-beaded collar, and 27 covered buttons that run down the spine like vertebrae. She discovered it in a fashion plate from Paris. Naturally she did. What the mistress desires, she obtains. What she never witnesses is the aching hands, the midnight stitching, the pricked thumbs concealed beneath fingertip bandages. You thread the needle again, squinting somewhat. The light's never quite correct up here. Neither is the seat. Your knees pop when you adjust. You understand that if the hem sits 1 inch too elevated, or the sleeves gather incorrectly at the elbow, the whole thing will be dismissed as unwearable, and your labour will be blamed. That's the thing about invisible work. It only gets noticed when it fails. You detect footsteps overhead, probably one of the boys from the roof crew patching the leaks again. You disregard them. Instead, you run your hands over the fabric, smoothing it into position. It's delicate as breath, and you despise how much you appreciate it. You were a dressmaker once, before this, before everything, before you required a roof more than a signboard. In another existence, you could have established a shop, had apprentices designed gowns with your name on them. Now you hem dreams that aren't yours. Somebody brings you tea, tepid, sloshing in a chipped mug. You thank her quietly. She's fresh, still optimistic, still brushing her apron clean every morning. You don't possess the heart to inform her it doesn't stay clean long. You return to the stitches. A narrow seam, nearly invisible, conceals a strip of interfacing. That's what keeps the bodice firm. You appreciate the metaphor. Women, after all, are anticipated to hold everything together while being nearly invisible themselves. Somewhere below, laughter rises up the drawing room again. The ladies must be entertaining. You imagine them gliding around in layers of tulle, sipping tea, complimenting each other's trims. Perhaps somebody will mention Lady Clara's gown. So elegant, they'll declare, so perfectly fitted. They won't consider you. But they'll be wearing you. That thought should sting instead. It provides you a strange sense of pride. You're not permitted in the ballroom, but your stitches are. Your labour stands up straight, even when you're too exhausted till the bobbin thread snaps. You sigh and reach for another. Beyond, church bells ring. It's almost 2, and you still possess 1 more petticoat to repair before the dinner dress arrives, for its final fitting. Afterward in the afternoon, the mistress herself arrives for her fitting. She doesn't knock. She glides into the cramped attic room like it's her drawing room, bringing perfume, impatience, and a faint hint of powder trailing behind her. You stand quickly, wiping your hands on your skirt before she can notice the ink stain on your palm. The dress is arranged neatly on the mannequin. It glows in the light, pale azure and impossibly smooth like the surface of a still lake. She doesn't comment on the gown, not yet. She begins with her own complaints. Her gloves are too constricting. Her ankles are swelling. The fish at luncheon was spoiled. You acknowledge where appropriate, the way one does with summer storms and hungry felines. Just let it pass over you. When she finally permits you to assist her into the dress, it's like dressing a glass statue. You slide the bodice over her shoulders, mindful of every pin still in position. She gasps, chilled, and shivers dramatically. You apologise, though it's not really your fault. Nothing ever is, but it always becomes so. You fasten each of the 27 buttons slowly, carefully. They're covered in matching silk, and each one had to be hand-sewn, turned, and stuffed like a miniature cushion. She'll never know that. She just knows whether they lie straight. As you labour your way down her spine, she begins to speak. Not to you, exactly, more like aloud to the room, to herself. She frets about the guest list for tomorrow night's supper, about which wine will be served, about whether her sister's new maid is a thief or merely French. You say nothing. That's part of the position too. When you complete the buttons, she walks to the long mirror. She stares, turning just slightly from side to side. You watch her face, not the dress. You can tell she's pleased, but naturally she doesn't say that. "It'll do," she says, and just like that, 3 weeks of stitching, pinning, hemming and bleeding into fabric is reduced to a shrug. She steps out of the gown and leaves you to hang it carefully in the muslin cover. Send it down for steaming. She tosses over her shoulder as she descends the stairs, alone again. You exhale slowly. Your shoulders slump. You sit, only now realizing how long you've been standing. You run your hand along the hem, smoothing it out once more. One tiny stitch has come loose. Nothing visible. But you fix it anyway. Naturally you do, because somebody will notice if you don't. Not with praise, but with blame. That evening, as the sun drops and the windows dim, you find yourself still seated beside the mannequin. The azure silk shimmers like water in the half-light. You whisper to the gown just to hear your own voice, a private joke between you and the thing you created. Tomorrow it will swirl through a room lit with chandeliers. It will be admired. It will be touched, envied, even gossiped about. But nobody will say your name. And so, before you pack it away, you allow yourself one small moment. You lean close, brush your hand along the inside seam, and whisper it into the lining. Just in case. The dress remembers. The kitchen is a universe of its own, a domain of clatter and heat tucked beneath the elegant floors of the dining room above. You descend into it as dusk begins to settle, just in time for the organised chaos of evening preparations. The cook commands here, a stocky woman with arms like rolling pins and a glare that can sour milk. She doesn't shout unless it's necessary, which is to say constantly. You tie on your apron, though it's already stained from earlier. The slate floor is cool beneath your shoes, but the atmosphere is stifling. A fire roars in the range oven, blackening the edges of the copper pots hung along the wall. You can hear the drip of broth, the hiss of fat, the dull thump of a cleaver landing again and again on a worn wooden board. There's no time for pleasantries. The menu for tonight includes roast duck, green pea soup, and something called aspic jelly that you're certain was invented as a punishment. Your position is everything that nobody else desires. Peeling, gutting, scraping, and stirring. Always stirring. The duck is your first victim. You reach into the cold bird and pull out the innards, slimy, slippery, and somehow still smelling of feathers. You glance at the prep sheet, liver for the pate neck for the stock heart. Undecided, you wipe your hands on your apron and move on. Beside you, another young woman is shelling peas with a speed that's almost violent. She hums under her breath. She's younger than you, but has already mastered the art of separating her face from her hands, smiling sweetly even as she guts a fish. It's a skill worth learning. The cook barks for the onions. You grab the basket and start slicing. They bite your eyes instantly, and before long you're blinking back tears that aren't all from the onions. You try not to sniffle too loudly. Last week somebody got scolded for emotional cooking. The cook said it spoils the broth. You stir the soup with one hand while flipping kidneys in a pan with the other. Timing is everything here. A moment too long and the sauce curdles. A moment too short and the duck bleeds. At the table, the mistress will wrinkle her nose and the footman will glance at you like it's your funeral. In the middle of this storm, you notice a strange silence, then realise it's because the aspic mould hasn't been turned out yet. You glance at it, gelatinous, pale, trembling like a ghost afraid to leave its grave. You despise aspic. Everybody does. But the master insists on it, claims it reminds him of Paris. You try not to imagine what else he picked up in Paris. Just then the chime rings from the dining room. Time's up. The footmen arrive, polished and smug, to collect the platters. You assist plate the duck, carefully placing the sprigs of parsley as if that will make it taste like more than it is. You wipe the edge of the dish with a cloth before handing it over. Presentation is everything, especially when nobody knows how close you came to burning the sauce 2 minutes ago. And just like that, it's gone up the dumbwaiter or through the door, off to be devoured. Without a second thought, you lick a bit of gravy off your knuckle when nobody's looking. It's the sole taste of supper you'll obtain. Once the dishes leave the kitchen, the genuine chaos begins. You might think things would slow down after all. The duck is gone, the soup's been served, and the aspic has somehow made it to the table intact. But no, now comes the part where everything must be cleaned, cooled, and put away, as if the kitchen had never erupted into culinary warfare. You start with the stock pot. It's enormous, heavy, and clings to every last speck of grease, like it resents being scrubbed. You pour out the dregs, then haul it over to the basin. The water scalds your wrists, but cold water would be worse. Congealed fat never surrenders easily. Beside you, the young woman from earlier is elbow-deep in gravy pans. Her hair sticks to her temple and she's muttering something about tripe being a form of revenge. You chuckle, but keep your head down. Laughter here is a rare and precious thing, rationed like sugar. As the plates return from upstairs, the genuine test begins. Did they consume it? And more importantly, did you? They finish it. You can tell how supper went without hearing a single word from the drawing room. Clean plates, good. Still half full. Somebody will inquire what was wrong. If there's a smear of untouched aspic left behind, you silently celebrate. The silverware must be soaked, dried, and polished until it gleams like new coin. Not just clean, flawless. Any smudge, any fingerprint, and the mistress might accuse the household of slipping. Once, a spoon came back with lipstick mark, still faintly visible. The resulting lecture lasted 45 minutes. You remember because you timed it with a kitchen clock. You mop the floor next, sweeping up onion skins, breadcrumbs, and a lone carrot end somebody kicked under the table. The floor is stained from years of boiling, baking, and bellowing, but still you scrub, elbows bent, skirt hiked, knuckles raw. At some point the cook disappears for a smoke or a nap, or possibly to cry into her apron. Nobody blames her. You take over the cooling of the jellies, watching the wobbly shapes tremble on their platters, like they know they're not long for this universe. The smell of meat lingers thick in the atmosphere. You stop noticing. After a while, the atmosphere feels thick with starch and sweat and the ghosts of onions past. You tug open a small window, letting in a sliver of cold atmosphere. It tastes clean, untouched. At the far end of the room, there's a cupboard you're not supposed to open. Inside, the cook keeps her private stores, things like white pepper, nutmeg, and a bottle of Madeira for sauces. Sometimes, if you've done well, she lets you dip a finger in the jam jar hidden on the second shelf. Tonight, she gives you a wink that's reward enough. When everything is finally put away and the coals banked low, you wash your hands in silence. The skin is puckered and sore, and you swear you can still smell marrow fat under your nails. You don't even like duck. You leave through the rear hallway, your footsteps soft and slow. Upstairs, the guests are still laughing. The mistress is likely accepting compliments for a supper she didn't lift a finger to prepare. And you gave her those compliments one blister at a time. Upstairs, beyond the servants' stairs, in the hush of the formal corridors, lies a room nobody talks about much, at least not loudly. The governess's quarters. Not quite family, not quite servant. A strange in-between space that feels more like exile than employment. You step inside quietly. The room is small, square, and smells faintly of chalk, lavender, soap, and paper. A desk faces the window, piled with arithmetic books and ink-blotted spelling sheets. The wallpaper is peeling in one corner and the rug doesn't reach the wall. But it's yours, at least for now. The children are already waiting in the schoolroom. You hear them chattering behind the door, sharp little voices full of mischief secrets and growing opinions. You smooth your hair and pinch a bit of colour into your cheeks, not because you're vain, because tired women are less respected than cheerful ones, and nobody wants their children educated by somebody who looks worn. When you enter, they hardly look up. The youngest is busy dipping a biscuit into a tea, letting it collapse into the cup like wet plaster. The older two are squabbling over who gets the map of Africa first. You settle them with a quiet word. Who? A raised eyebrow and the well-worn tone of somebody who knows how to command a room with just a breath. Teaching is only part of your position. You're a tutor, yes, but also a referee, a confidant, and on bad days, a convenient outlet for their mother's discontent. She once accused you of letting them read dangerous novels because her daughter used the word yearn. You teach them Latin verbs and French grammar, but also how to hide a smirk behind a teacup and how not to cry when the governor says no. You walk a razor-thin line between discipline and affection. Too warm and you're presumptuous. Too cold and you're heartless. You remember the previous governess. Her room was locked up for weeks after she left, though nobody said where she'd gone. One day she was there, hair neatly pinned, a faint Scottish accent always humming. The next, gone. A new footman mentioned something about a letter or a cousin or a scandal you never asked. The children, though, are beginning to inquire about you. Where you're from, why you never go to town, why you consume supper alone. You laugh off their curiosity, redirect it toward the French Revolution or the parts of a tulip. But you can't stop the smallest one from watching you like she's trying to see the story behind your eyes. You almost want to tell her, but you don't, because that story isn't neat. It doesn't fit in a lesson plan or a recitation. It's full of cracked windows, unpaid bills, and a letter from your sister that you haven't opened yet. Instead, you smile and move on to handwriting practice. The eldest young woman writes with a stiff, angular style like her mother. The youngest curls her letters as if they're dancing. You correct them gently, fingers brushing paper, voice even and soft. The hours pass slowly but steadily. Outside, the sun begins to fade. You light the lamp, careful not to drip oil on the desk. Another hour, maybe two, and then you can retreat, not to rest, but to your own small corner where you can let your shoulders fall for just a minute. Evening falls, and the children are finally dismissed. You gather their ink-stained worksheets, stack their readers, and wipe a sticky jam thumbprint off the edge of your desk with the edge of your cuff. The classroom empties out, not in peace, just in absence. The kind of quiet that vibrates, doesn't settle. Your steps back to your room are slow, feet throbbing, though not from hours of standing. It's the throb of restraint, of keeping yourself locked down all day in a space where everything's weighed. Your speech, your gestures, your expression. There's no unwinding here, only retreat. Nobody brings you dinner, not in the true sense. A chilled dish appears outside your door sometime after the household's eaten. Maybe bread, perhaps a hard-boiled egg, a thin slice of meat if the cook's feeling kind. You consume it perched on your cramped bed, spine rigid, gaze locked on the drape that won't fully shut. Through the opening, you glimpse the night sky. Occasionally, when you strain to hear, laughter drifts up from the parlour, seeping through the wooden planks. Lady Clara's laughter rings clear, effortless and carefree. The children's father, distant throughout daylight, transforms into something vibrant. Following wine, someone strikes up the pianoforte. You picture them all shimmering in candle glow, wrapped in rich fabrics, tasting sweet liquors. Up here you taste watered-down tea and reread the same story you've concealed inside your Latin primer. Your boots stay near the threshold, your hairbrush stays neatly stowed, your correspondence stays bound with ribbon and never visible. Your existence is spectral in a dwelling brimming with vitality because you're not exactly help. You don't wash floors or prepare vegetables, yet you're not kin either. You don't share their meals, don't stroll in the gardens on Sunday afternoons, don't collect correspondence at the main entrance. You exist between worlds, simply drifting in the margins of another family's narrative. They address you as Miss, yet they never speak your complete name. You're a designation, not an individual. Once you attempted joining them in the parlour during a downpour when the classroom hearth refused to kindle. You carried your needlework. You remained silent, positioned near the periphery, needle moving, eyes cast down. Lady Clara interrupted her conversation and inquired with an overly pleasant tone whether you were entirely at ease. You haven't attempted it again. Sometimes you question what might happen if you disappeared like the previous governess. Would the children weep? Would Lady Clara exhale and remark, unfortunate she was progressing so well with the geography lessons? Would they retain memory of the verse you shared with them today, the one where the woman transforms into a songbird? You slide the volume beneath your pillow. Tomorrow you'll instruct them about waterways or ancient Roman routes or something equally distant and unchanging. But right now you allow your lids to fall. Beyond your door, the house groans and whispers above you. The family occupies the floors below, the staff maintains order. And here, isolated in your box of borrowed illumination, you exist, invisible yet essential. The house falls quiet once more. Not the stillness of tranquility, but the hush of everything being restored. You glide silently through the corridor with your sleeves pushed up and your pail swaying softly against your leg. The hearths have gone cold. The dining seats have been tucked in. The mattresses remain heated upstairs, but nobody's conscious to witness what follows. You move past the sitting room and a glint of metal catches your attention. Someone's lost a hairpin beside the carpet. You bend down, retrieve it, and slip it into your apron pocket. Not to claim. Simply to return later without mention. That's the way things operate here. You're assigned late cleaning this week, which means 2 responsibilities: chamber vessels and marks. You begin with the master's dressing chamber. The fragrance of his cologne persists, pungent and commanding. On the bureau, a whiskey glass sits, with a trace of amber at its base. A neckcloth lies sprawled beside it, and the seat cushion bears a dark indentation where he rested. You don't disturb any of it. You proceed directly to the wash basin. The liquid is clouded, shaving lather and bristles suspended in pale swirls. You drain it without recoiling, hands certain from routine. Behind you, the chamber pot awaits. You lift the lid, nose angled slightly away, and transport it down the rear stairway as though carrying fine china. Nobody discusses this labour. It's as vital as it is unmentionable. The refined world pretends that ladies don't menstruate, that children don't wet their linens, that men don't leave strands of hair, tobacco residue, cinders and worse in their bedding. But you understand better. You've mopped it away, you've boiled it clean. You've witnessed stains appear and vanish like confidences. In the linen cupboard you reach for fresh rags. The shelves are organised by status, fine damask at the summit, coarse cotton scraps at the foundation. You take one from each tier, you'll require both shortly. Lady Clara's dressing chamber. You tap softly, even though midnight has passed. No response. She's long since withdrawn. Still, you ease the door open carefully and enter. The space is a tumult of abandoned silks and scuffed slippers. Her undergarment hangs from a chair's back, the structure bent from pressure. On the vanity, powder adheres to a bristle brush and a fragrance bottle has toppled sideways, dark essence seeping onto delicate fabric. But the worst damage is on the small sofa, a T-mark, broad and expanding, nearly invisible against the patterned upholstery. You press it, still moist. You could disregard it, act as though you missed it. But it will become permanent, and then they'll hold you responsible. So you kneel alongside it, extract your small vial of vinegar solution and a pristine cloth, and start blotting carefully, steadily, with the kind of attention typically saved for holy relics or medical procedures. The fabric darkens. You persist. This is what it means to eliminate other people's disorder, to leave zero evidence that existence is ever messy, that blood flows, that beverages spill. that humans are flawed. You've cleaned far worse. A childbirth gone awry, a gown destroyed following a collapse. Once you discovered a fractured pearl ornament and a smear of rouge on the rear of the library couch. You didn't inquire, you simply scrubbed. Nobody wants to recall. That's your function. You make the dwelling forget. You wring the cloth dry and dab the final traces of the tea mark away. The sofa will withstand scrutiny now, unless the mistress judges otherwise. You stand gradually, knees stiffened, and adjust the fringe on the adjacent cushion as an extra measure. Everything must appear untouched, immaculate, as though nobody's ever occupied this space, grieved here, spilled anything here. As you shut the door behind you, a recognisable wave of weariness settles across your shoulder blades. But the night's duties aren't finished. There's still the back stairway landing where one of the housemaids referenced a mark which typically means something disagreeable that nobody wants to articulate. You traverse the tight corridor where the servants' bells suspend like brass insects, each one marked with a separate chamber. The bell for the nursery still shivers faintly. You halt. It's not your level, not your duty, but you listen regardless. Nothing. Just wind moaning through the flue. You continue. The landing is shadowy, illuminated only by the wavering of a lantern positioned on a ledge. The mark is on the floorboards, brownish, faded, aged. Possibly ink, possibly something more troubling. You kneel once more. Your spine protests, and you scrub it with salt and citrus until the wood grain rises and the scent of acid saturates your nostrils. You think of the girl who laboured here before you. She was spirited, too spirited, smiled too readily. One evening she didn't return from the village. Some said she eloped with a travelling merchant. Others claimed she'd developed a cough and been dispatched home. You discovered one of her hair ribbons weeks afterward beneath the floor covering. You never spoke of it in this dwelling. Silence forms part of your compensation. You descend to the laundry chamber one final time. The floor is damp from earlier and your shoes slide somewhat. You brace yourself on the scrubbing board, the frigid metal pressing into your palm. You pour the last of the sudsy water into the drain, watching it spiral into the darkness. Before rest, you cleanse your own hands with the remaining vinegar mixture. It prevents the splits from becoming infected, you've been instructed. You've never consulted a physician, not for a scratch, not for the blister that once ruptured beneath your heel and bled through your hose. You recall that day the mistress praised your soundless footsteps. You didn't feel honoured, you felt dizzy. Finally you ascend to your shared chamber at the dwelling's peak. The atmosphere is sparse up here, more frigid than any other location. You move past the others, already sleeping, curved like punctuation marks in narrow beds. You undress by candle glow, creasing your apron precisely even though it carries the scent of starch and soot. As you draw the meagre blanket across yourself, your body throbs in places you cannot identify, behind your eyes, beneath your ribs, under your fingernails. You consider the chambers you cleaned tonight, how they gleam now, how nobody will question why, how the world will presume they were perpetually spotless. And you? You'll rouse in several hours and start over, your labour already vanished by the dwelling's morning appetite, because your duty isn't merely to clean, it's to erase everything. Morning once more. And this time you're called to the bedchamber, not for tidying, not for washing, for dressing. Lady Clara's bell chimes twice, brief, crisp, unmistakable. You secure your hair back, collect the dressing materials, and ascend the servants' stairs swiftly, your footsteps light but rehearsed. She despises waiting. Her door stands ajar, but only partially. You knock, regardless. Enter, she summons, and you step inside. She's positioned before the looking-glass, still in her nightgown, hair unbrushed and eyes swollen. The chamber carries the scent of perfume, wax, and last evening's brandy, subtle but unmistakable. The maid must have overlooked the decanter, concealed behind the drapery, or didn't venture to move it. Without speaking, you commence. First, heated water in the bowl. You assist her in washing her face, dabbing gently with a cloth. Then the brush, slow strokes from crown to neck. Precisely as she prefers. She doesn't speak and neither do you. She flinches once and you ease your grasp. Some mornings she prefers it firm. Today isn't one of those mornings. You arrange her undergarments, delicate chemise, gentle stays, silk hose. She adjusts slightly as you assist her in dressing, arms limp as though it's all somewhat overwhelming. You glimpse faint crimson marks on her ribs as you secure the stays. Not from you. From years of corsetry they perpetually leave traces. "I have luncheon with Mrs. Ainsworth," she states finally. Her voice is parched. "And tea with the vicar's spouse. Ensure the lavender walking gown is pressed." You nod. It already is. You pressed it last evening with your arms throbbing from a day filled with coal buckets and soapy basins. She doesn't request, she presumes. You retrieve her garters, secure her shoes, and assist her in standing. She turns to the mirror, examining herself with clinical exactness. You notice her fingers quiver slightly as she secures a brooch at her neck. You retreat, wordless. Then comes the corset, tightening the feared portion. You've performed this countless times, but each occasion is a delicate negotiation. Too constricting and she'll react sharply, too loose and she'll fault you for how the bodice fits. You draw the laces steadily. She clutches the bedpost. Her breathing catches. "Stop!" she says abruptly, voice sharp. You freeze, loosen it just slightly. You comply gently. She doesn't clarify, and you don't inquire. That's the performance. You both pretend she's well, that nothing's too constricting, nothing aches, and nobody sees the tears that occasionally surface when the laces pull just marginally too hard. Once she's dressed, she dismisses you with a gesture, already reaching for her perfume. You bow slightly, just adequately, and turn to depart. But as you shut the door, you hear her exhale. Not the kind of exhalation that signals contentment, the kind that means she's weary already and it's not even 10. You walk back to the corridor, arms tingling from strain, and shake it away. You've performed this daily for months, for other women too. You've dried their tears, concealed their bruises, fastened their gowns over ribs that couldn't quite expand, and each time you've smiled, retreated and disappeared before the first caller arrived. You're not simply dressing her, you're constructing her armour. The corridor outside her chamber is lined with subtle echoes, heels striking marble, doors closing heavily, the rustle of fabric swishing like foliage. You move through it quietly, arms crossed and eyes lowered, the way you were instructed. Visibility without existence, perpetually present, never observed. You proceed next to the younger sister's chamber, Miss Edith, who insists on being laced like an ancient Greek statue but loses consciousness when the ribbons are drawn too tightly. You knock once. No answer. You knock twice. Still silence. You enter cautiously. She's seated by the window in her undergarment, gazing at nothing specific. Her hair is partially brushed, cascading over one shoulder like an incomplete thought. When she notices you, she doesn't speak, simply nods. The dressing ritual begins again, each step recognisable, but each woman entirely different. Where Lady Clara expects exactness, Miss Edith needs comfort. You speak to her more gently, casually mentioning the new bonnet she ordered, mentioning the garden gathering next week. She smiles faintly. "I experienced a dream," she whispers as you assist with her petticoat, "that I wore men's trousers and ran down the street like a criminal. You smile too, though you keep your face averted. It's not the first occasion she's expressed something similar. You once discovered her reading a copy of Jane Eyre, concealed behind a book of religious texts. She tucked it under the cushion when the governess entered. As you adjust her corset, she bites her lip. "Not too constricting," she says, as if recalling last time. You nod, but she turns regardless. Just as you're drawing the laces taut, your knuckles graze her back and you detect a small scar just above her ribs. You don't inquire. She doesn't volunteer. By the time the final button is secured, she appears as she's intended to, composed, modest, delicately contained, a sculpture of fine fabric and costly tailoring. But her eyes drift back to the window. "Do you believe it's warmer in France?" she asks abruptly. You pause. "Perhaps," you respond. She nods slowly. "Maybe I'll travel there someday when I can breathe." You straighten her collar. "Would you prefer the pearl brooch today, miss?" She blinks, and the moment folds itself closed like a confidential letter. "Yes," she says. "Pearls." You retrieve it from the velvet tray and pin it neatly just below her collarbone. Then you step back, hands clasped. She offers you a small smile, not courteous, not distant, but genuine. "Thank you." You return it with a curtsy and quietly depart. In the corridor, you exhale. There's an art to this occupation. Nobody records the precise method to lace a corset without leaving bruises. The phrases to speak that feel like conversation but leave no trace. The method to assist a woman into a facade that makes her feel more authentic, not less. And there's a cruelty in how near you stand. Near enough to detect their perfume, to perceive the worry in their shoulders, but never near enough to be perceived yourself. The world knows how they appeared, but you know how they felt. The nursery door groans as you open it, and for a moment the smell of milk saturates your nostrils, sweet, warm, and faintly acidic at the edges. It's still dark inside, curtains pulled. The fire hasn't yet been stoked, but in the corner, in a cradle lined with lace and folded muslin, something moves. You step nearer, and there she is, the infant, Lady Clara's newest, wrapped tightly, fists clenched, cheeks flushed with heat from excessive blankets. Her eyes flutter open and she makes a small sound, halfway between a hiccup and a sob. You rock the cradle, gently, but she isn't seeking comfort. She's seeking you, because she recognizes your scent, not her mother's, yours. You sit, shift your shawl aside and unfasten the buttons of your bodice. The air is cool against your skin, but the infant is already rooting, lips puckered and searching. You guide her to your breast and she latches without hesitation. She's ravenous. She always is. You hold her with one arm and steady your breathing with the other. The wet nurse. That's you. Officially. Unofficially, you're the mother. She knows. Lady Clara's milk ceased after 2 weeks, claimed the infant's cries made her anxious. The physician nodded and stated it was typical, gently, as if explaining that some women simply weren't designed for such primal responsibilities. And so you were hired, selected for your health, your age, your silence. Nobody inquired about your own child, but you remember him, his tiny fingers, the way he nestled into you after nursing, the curve of his head against your chest. You remember the sound he made when you handed him over to your cousin, and the way your arms felt empty afterward. You were informed it was an opportunity, a respectable house, decent wages, warm lodgings. And it was, if you don't count the ache that persists every time this infant opens her mouth to cry. And it's your name she calls, not her mother's. She nurses deeply, her tiny hand grasping your finger, her eyes half closing. You hum, just slightly, something your own mother once sang. It's not proper, but nobody's listening. When she finishes, you shift her to your shoulder and pat her back gently. A soft burp, then stillness. You tuck your breast away, button your blouse and hold her a moment longer than necessary. Then you place her gently into the cradle, Rewrap the blankets and pull the curtains slightly to dim the light. You rinse your hands in the basin by the wall. There's a small mirror above it. You barely recognize your reflection anymore. Exhausted eyes, hollowed cheeks, the faint curve of a smile you only wear when nobody else is around. You tidy the nursery, repack the linen basket, fold the flannel squares just so. Someone else will assume control soon, the nursemaid for the day shift. She'll inform the mistress that the infant slept through the morning, that she's growing robust. Nobody will mention what made her strong. Nobody will inquire about your son. He's 2 now, or nearly. You wonder if he's walking, if he calls your cousin Mama. You shut the door gently behind you and pretend none of it aches. The corridor beyond the nursery is dim, the gas lamps barely lit, casting elongated shadows that stretch along the wallpaper like spectral branches. You make your way down past the morning room and the servants' staircase, arms empty now, but chest still aching in a way no tea or medicine can remedy. You head to the laundry chamber to wash your cloths, one for the infant's milk, another for yourself. This portion isn't recorded in the household ledger. Nobody charts how many ounces you produce, how long she nurses, or what it costs your own body to provide nourishment each day without pause. Nobody pays attention to what's being extracted. You scrub the cloths clean in silence. The water is frigid this time. The fire's burned low. Your hands sting, but you persist washing. Milk adheres to fabric in ways soap can't always eliminate. The marks remain pale, persistent, like recollection. After rinsing, you hang them to dry on a line by the window, beside a row of stockings and one of the housemaid's aprons. Through the window, the rooftops are beginning to brighten with the first blush of dawn. You know the infant will be waking again shortly. They always do, in cycles. Hunger, sleep, silence, cry, and always you. Back in the kitchen, someone's begun stirring porridge. You catch the scent, oats and smoke, and your stomach turns slightly. You're not hungry. Your body's already been labouring all night. There's a kettle warming and you pour yourself a half mug of weak tea. The tin of sugar is nearly empty. You don't take any. Another girl enters the kitchen, older, eyes still puffy from sleep. She sees you and says nothing, just nods. She understands your shift, understands what it demands. You offer her the rest of the hot water. She nods again. Nobody here wastes words. By the time the rest of the household is waking, you've slipped upstairs again, unseen. The wet nurse isn't meant to linger. You're not supposed to hold the infant too long, not supposed to hum, not supposed to cry. You lie down on your cot in the attic chamber alone for a few moments. Your arms still carry the weight of the child. Phantom warmth. You close your eyes and attempt to recall your son's face, how his eyebrows furrowed when he nursed, how he once sneezed mid-latch and made you laugh so hard you cried. But his face is starting to blur. Time does that. Or maybe it's guilt. Sometimes you dream he's here, tottering into the kitchen, cheeks round, voice high. But you always wake up to the ache, the same ache the other nursemaids speak of in code, saying things like, "My back's sore today," or "I think the weather's affecting my chest." What they mean is, "My child isn't here, and I gave his milk to someone else." You fold your shawl beneath your head, attempting to stretch out your spine. You've earned a few hours of rest if the bells permit it. You breathe deeply, feeling your ribs rise and fall. You try not to cry, not because you're afraid someone will hear, but because nobody ever does. The attic rafters still creak above you as you stir from rest, but sleep was shallow. Your body never quite forgets to listen for the bell. You swing your legs over the side of the cot and pull on your shoes, the leather rigid with age and labour. Downstairs the scullery's already clanking with early movement, but before the pots, before the starch, there's something else calling, mending. You carry a basket of torn linens and ripped undergarments to the far end of the attic, where a low window filters in watery light. This is night work, usually, but the pile's grown large, and if you don't start now, it'll be waiting when you're too exhausted to see straight. You sit, thread your needle, and begin one hem at a time. A ripped pillowcase, likely from a restless night or careless footman, a lace trim torn on a corset, a stocking with a hole near the toe. These are quiet wounds, silent betrayals, things nobody notices until they snag, until they scratch, until they embarrass. That's when you get blamed, so you mend before the noticing happens. Your stitches are neat, invisible. That's the goal, to repair without trace, to make it seem like nothing ever tore. You're not alone up here. The others are busy with their own work. A girl whose knuckles are raw and red is pressing starch into collars at the distant table. Someone else is cutting down candle wicks for the rooms on the upper floor. Nobody talks, not out of unfriendliness, but because speaking drains energy, and there's barely enough of that to go around. The labour is monotonous, though it demands attention. Your hands have learned the patterns, but your thoughts wander elsewhere. You think about the governess in a room nearby, writing out tomorrow's lessons by lamplight, about the nursemaid on the lower floor listening for the baby's breathing, about the cook already mapping out this evening's meal. You think about all the women in this household, each tucked away like cotton filling sewn into a mattress seam, gentle, essential, invisible. For a brief moment, that realization lifts your spirits. Then the bell sounds. Not the crisp double ring from the upper floors, the quick, insistent tap from the rear stairwell, the one that signals something's damaged, something's required, or someone's in distress. You place your needle down, mark where you left off with a pin, and stand. You understand the routine you always have. The bell summons, you respond, because even in its sleeping hours the house pulses with life, and you're among the hands maintaining that rhythm. The bell's signal creates a ripple through the attic space. Not alarm, simply movement. You walk down the narrow staircase, basket abandoned, and trace the thread of necessity through the service hallways, beyond the linen storage, beyond the cleaning closet, until you arrive at the rear pantry. There, beside the entrance to the root cellar, the butler is waiting. His expression is unreadable, as it always is. He gestures wordlessly toward the kitchen fireplace. A coal grate has worked itself loose. Nothing catastrophic, just hazardous enough to burn someone or allow sparks to land where they shouldn't. Repair it before cook notices. Fix it, he says in the exhausted tone of someone who's delivered this kind of instruction countless times, and then he vanishes, as though called away elsewhere. You acknowledge him naturally, so now you're not simply repairing hems, you're repairing hearths. You kneel once more. There's a particular stance to working in this house, stooped at the middle, gaze lowered, hands busy. The coal powder smudges your sleeves as you lift the grate, and sense the heat still pulsing from below. You grab a rag and ease the iron back into position, cautious not to let it make noise. Cook despises disturbances when she's taking inventory. Your hands sting somewhat. You breathe on your fingertips, then clean them on your apron. No room for grievances. The task is complete. But before you can stand, you notice something beneath the hearth. Hidden just past the bricks is a piece of linen, scorched at one edge, wadded up. You reach for it, anticipating a scrap, but it's something different. A handkerchief embroidered with initials, not your own. You flatten it against your knee and examine it closely. The needlework is refined, somewhat irregular, not a professional's handiwork, a lady's possibly. Amateur embroidery. You identify the initials. They belong to one of the upstairs girls, one who wept last week near the greenhouse when she believed no one noticed you. You fold the handkerchief with care and tuck it into your pocket. Perhaps you'll give it back, perhaps you won't. Some things are lost deliberately. Returning upstairs, the atmosphere has grown thicker. The corridors feel bloated with warmth, laundry vapour and the aroma of boiled meat. It's noon once more. You've stopped tracking time except through what your body reports. Aching feet, tender wrists, a hunger you don't have the privilege to satisfy just yet. But the basket is still there waiting, so you come back, thread, stitch, fold, pin. This time it's a pair of undergarments with ripped ties. You swap them out with fresh cotton, strengthened with small cross-stitches at the end so they won't tear once more. It takes 3 minutes, the work of generations, because long after dinner is removed, long after the ladies change and slide into nightgowns you've repaired, long after the lamps go dark upstairs, your stitches persist, silent, hidden, resting against the body. You complete the basket as the sun drops below the roofline. Outside you hear the church bell chime 3, and inside you start on a second batch. Because evening is approaching, and women like you don't receive nights off. The sitting room glows with late afternoon sunlight pouring through the high windows and reflecting off the polished brass fixtures and the dusty velvet of the couches. You enter quietly across the doorway holding a small tray of handkerchiefs to be folded and stored in the rosewood cabinet near the entrance. But this isn't your typical territory today. You've been summoned here for a different reason. Lady Clara's companion has fallen sick, or maybe she simply escaped the house for a while. Nobody states it outright, but the suggestion is obvious. Her duties are temporarily assigned to you, not as a housemaid. As a substitute lady's companion, you're instructed to remain in the room and be helpful. 2 directives that convey everything and nothing simultaneously. So you settle on the edge of the rigid floral chair closest to the window, back erect, hands clasped, gaze down but not excessively so. You're meant to be seen but not conspicuous, there but not engaged. Lady Clara sits close by, leafing through the ladies' magazine, with the same look she wears when a meal is too cold, faint displeasure smoothed over by routine. Facing her sits Mrs. Ainsworth, the vicar's wife, whose entire frame seems constructed from starch and doubt. "I do agree," Mrs. Ainsworth says, tasting her tea. "As do I," Lady Clara responds sweetly, though one manages. Her eyes dart toward you just briefly, and there it is, the slightest tilt of her head, a caution. Be motionless, be flawless. So you sit and serve and observe. They discuss menus and headaches, about Mrs. Summersby's shocking new hat and whether gooseberry preserves belong in trifles. You nod when appropriate. You smile subtly when cued, and when Mrs. Ainsworth directs a question at you, you respond with rehearsed neutrality. "Yes, madam, the weather has grown chilly. It's the most harmless thing you can offer." Lady Clara acknowledges you with a slight upturn of her lips. Afterward, you know she'll describe you as adequate. Exceptional praise from a woman who once let a footman go for sneezing during a curtsy. As the talk turns toward charitable committees, you straighten your posture. This is where the undercurrent changes. They're planning a visit to the parish poor next week. A publicity opportunity, you gather. But they frame it as an obligation, a sacred, weighty burden carried by those born privileged. "It's the duty of women such as ourselves," Mrs. Ainsworth declares, blotting her mouth. Lady Clara exhales. They do adore the canned peaches. You maintain your neutral expression. You recall the previous time you visited one of those cottages to drop off coal, not conversation. You recall the expression in the children's faces, not appreciation, just need. But none of that gets mentioned here. Here, charity is pristine, attractive, wrapped in paper and tied with string. You're handed a biscuit from the platter. You accept it with a quiet thank you, divide it cleanly in 2, and take small bites. It tastes of butter and age. Lady Clara starts discussing a new novel, something controversial. The room fills with laughter. You laugh as well, precisely timed, a half-second delayed, just enough to demonstrate you're present in the room, but not entirely within it. The mantel clock rings. You have another hour to sit as the imitation of someone else. The hour passes slowly like hardening wax. You sit motionless, hands resting gently in your lap, as the ladies settle into a comfortable pattern of judgment. Who possesses the finest silverware? Who employed a French maid for too long? Whose son is conversing with which governess far too frequently? Lady Clara's words rest on her tongue like candied almonds. sweet with a hint of venom. She praises the dress Mrs. Ainsworth wore to the harvest dinner, but you remember she ridiculed it upstairs just yesterday, calling it a window curtain with aspirations. That's the performance. You fulfill your role when requested. You hand over the preserves when glanced toward. You smile soft, constant, neutral enough to seem unthreatening. You offer nothing further about the weather, wiser not to venture into personal views. Lady Clara grows weary of the company eventually. You can sense it in how she stirs her tea longer than she drinks it, in the subtle eye movement when Mrs. Ainsworth begins a story about her housemaid confusing lavender pouches for cooking spice. But she waits, allows the woman to conclude, then shuts her magazine with a breath too delicate to appear rude. "Shall we take a stroll?" she proposes, rising like mist from her seat. "And now you're excused." You rise as well, offering a small curtsy. Lady Clara doesn't recognise it. She seldom does. Mrs. Ainsworth nods curtly. You wait for them to exit into the corridor before collecting the tea items onto the tray. This is where the invisible companion reverts to a housemaid. The teapot is halfway full, the sugar container nearly depleted. One of the napkins bears a lipstick smear. You fold it inward to conceal the stain and transport everything back through the servants' passage to the washing area. Along your route, you encounter the butler, who lifts an eyebrow. "So?" he remarks, quietly and with amusement. "You're advancing in status now." You give him the same measured smile you offered Mrs. Ainsworth. Upon reaching the washing area, it's steaming and active again. Pans crash, water hisses in the basin, and someone is complaining about a missing seasoning container. You place the tray down, extract the silver utensils, and wash each item individually, returning once more to the cadence of service. Later that evening you walk past the sitting room again. The chairs are vacant now, though the space still carries the faint scent of lemon cookies and ladies' perfume. You stop for a breath, just one, and catch your own image in the glass of the display cabinet. For an instant it surprises you. You resemble one of them, hair secured back neatly, face composed. If someone didn't have context, they might think you belong in this room. But naturally you don't. You're not the visitor. You're the echo of the visitor, the stand-in for comfort. You pivot away, return toward the kitchen, and vanish once more into the warm, humming core of the house. Tomorrow another visitor will come, or another companion will become unwell, or another woman will require someone quiet to serve tea, to agree, to maintain silence like a silver platter. And you'll be prepared, because being invisible is still being essential. The nursery corridor carries the smell of chalk powder, aged wool, and something mildly sweet, perhaps barley water or pear preserves. You walk carefully, footsteps murmuring on the faded carpet runner. As you near the schoolroom, a soft hum of recitation drifts through the partially closed door, broken by the scrape of a slate pencil and the sporadic sigh. Inside, the governess is positioned rigidly at her desk. Her bearing is textbook precise, hands resting atop a slim volume of moral stories for young women. Opposite her, two girls sit bent over their writing slates, brows creased, tongues emerging from the edges of their mouths in focus. You smile softly. You've witnessed this before in a different house, a different child, a different era. You're not here to instruct today, not formally. You're here to collect the record books. Lady Clara has requested them, the small green notebooks where lessons are documented, grades tracked, behaviours recorded in euphemisms like energetic or difficult. You wait at the threshold until the governess sees you, her gaze lifting with mild surprise, though she remains quiet initially. Only after the girls complete their sentences and glance up does she gesture toward the shelf. "Second stack," she says quietly. You cross the room softly, mindful not to disturb the globe by the fireplace. As you grab the record books, you spot something wedged between them, a folded page of music, worn at the corners and marked with ink. A simple melody, not from the textbooks. Something traditional, folk perhaps. You set it aside, focusing back on the assignment. But the children are observing you. Are you the one who sings at night? The younger girl inquires. You pause. No, says her sister, before you can respond. That's the wind through the attic. The governess remains silent, doesn't correct them, doesn't clarify either. You gather the notebooks and offer a slight bow before exiting. In the corridor you pause. The door shuts behind you with a gentle click. But their question remains with you, because sometimes, late in the evening, you do hum to yourself, while folding linens, while sweeping ash from the fireplace. Traditional songs handed down by women whose identities you never discovered. Songs about rivers, salt, departure, songs about waiting. Songs that nobody upstairs has ever encountered, unless naturally they were paying attention. You head back to the main hallway. Record books held firmly, but before you hand them over, you make a detour down the rear stairs. There's something else requiring attention. The oldest daughter, Florence, is in the drawing room by herself. For once, she isn't occupied with reading. She's positioned by the fireplace, turning the pages of a book she clearly can't comprehend. You observe her lips moving wordlessly, her forehead wrinkling. When she spots you, she tenses, shutting the book with excessive force. I wasn't, she begins. You shake your head softly. Certainly not, miss. She eases just a fraction. You glance down and notice the edge of a bruise along her wrist, partially concealed by lace. It's not fresh, fading, but you observe. You always do. She catches your attention and hastily tugs her sleeve down. Neither of you utters a word, but something transfers between you, like the exchange of a secret, invisible and weightless, yet burdensome in the soul. Later, in the afternoon, you're called again, this time not by a bell, but by a murmur. The nursemaid locates you in the corridor outside the washing area, her face tense, her eyes darting nervously toward the upper landing. She's distraught, she whispers. Miss Florence, could you possibly assist? It's not your responsibility, not officially. But in a house such as this, official means nothing, and silent competence means everything. You ascend the stairs quietly, the carpet dampening your footsteps. At the corridor's end, Florence's bedroom door remains slightly open. You knock once. Silence, then, nearly inaudible. Enter. You slip through. Florence perches on the edge of her bed, spine curved, shoulders quivering just slightly. Not openly weeping, she would never permit herself that indulgence, but holding herself intact with the sort of tension that fractures more than it supports. Her hair is loose, ribbons hanging like discarded thoughts. She's gripping something in her hands, a small item gleaming faintly. You step nearer and identify it, the pearl brooch you fastened to her sister this morning. But this one is distinct, more aged, weightier, the clasp twisted slightly out of alignment. A family treasure maybe, or a token, or an error. She doesn't raise her eyes when she speaks. Mother said I held my violin incorrectly, she whispers. Said I humiliated her before the Ainsworths. She confiscated this from me. She opens her palm, displaying the brooch completely. A hairline fracture runs across the pearl's surface. She said if I can't conduct myself appropriately, I don't merit beautiful things. You sense something within you grow taut, an invisible thread snapping quietly. Not fury, not shock, just awareness. You've known women who wounded themselves and women who wounded others, and women who did both because the world offered them no other form to inhabit. You sit next to her, maintaining a respectful inch of space. Let me examine it, you say, gently. She hesitates, then deposits the brooch in your hand. The clasp is truly bent. You retrieve your small sewing kit from your apron, always carried even when you're not repairing fabric, and use the tiny pliers to coax the metal back into alignment. It requires a minute, perhaps two. When you complete it, you return it. Florence stares at it, blinking rapidly, as though uncertain what to experience. Thank you, she whispers. Not formally, not mechanically, a genuine thank you, carved from a moment where she feels more girl than daughter, more herself than someone else's mirror. You assist her, pinning the brooch to her dress. She selected deep burgundy today, a shade that complements her, but her mother disapproves. You smooth the fabric over it gently. It doesn't appear broken at all, she says. No, you answer. Things seldom remain broken when someone cares enough to repair them. Her throat constricts around a breath. She nods. Then, because she's still a child despite the corsets and formal manners, she requests in a small voice, "Will you remain while I practice? Just for a moment?" You check the clock. Somewhere below there's a pot to wash, a sheet to press, a bell waiting to sound. But for now, for this instant, you sit in the chair beside her vanity. She raises her violin. Her bow wavers at first, then stabilizes. The first note is delicate, the second is more confident, and by the third she isn't considering her mother at all. You listen until she concludes, shoulders dropping with relief, and only then do you stand, smoothing your apron. "Nobody will know you are here," Florence says softly. You smile in return. They never do. But for once, it doesn't seem like erasure, it seems like meaning. You're dispatched that evening with a mending basket beneath your arm and a shawl secured tightly around your shoulders. Not for tasks exactly. Lady Clara has determined her embroidery circle should convene at the vicarage this week, and someone must escort her with the lace samples, fabric rolls, and refreshments. It might as well be you. You proceed 5 steps behind her on the sidewalk, head lowered against the breeze, careful not to let the linen-covered basket strike your hip too noisily. The street is muddy from yesterday's rain, and the gas lamps flicker as twilight consumes the rooftops. Lady Clara moves ahead, as though the cold doesn't affect her. You follow behind, feet aching, glancing sideways at passing windows. Through the glass, you observe silhouettes leaning over dinner, children squirming in laps, an elderly man dozing by the fire. Domestic tableaus, private, authentic. You blink and continue walking. At the vicarage, you're directed to use the side gate, not the main entrance, never the main entrance. Inside, the women have already assembled, 4 of them this time, positioned in a casual circle around the sitting room fire, their skirts billowing like fabric clouds. You recognise them? Not individually, but by category. The one with the penetrating eyes who constantly corrects your stitching. The one who speaks too boisterously and consumes the sherry intended for later. The one who contributes lace, but never produces any. Lady Clara joins them effortlessly, sliding into discussion about needlework and Parisian hem techniques. You're provided a stool in the corner, hardly a seat, and the basket is opened. Threads, needles, hoops, patterns, the instruments of a very specific battle. You begin working silently. A sampler, cross-stitched, initials in white on cream, understated, nearly invisible. Like you, the women gossip on, but beneath the innocent talk about tea varieties and coat linings, you detect the edge of something more pointed. "Did you hear what occurred with the vicar's housemaid?" one woman inquires, her needle stopping mid-air. "Eloped with a soldier, I heard." No, terminated for being discovered with a man after curfew. They tisk, they grimace, they shake their heads with solemn entertainment. Then, as if remembering your presence, one leans slightly toward your corner. "You must know something," she says, voice honey, sweet but sharp. "You girls always do." You look up slowly, fingers stopping their stitching. "I only know how to sew, madam," you respond. They laugh, not warmly. Lady Clara doesn't intervene. She never does. You resume your work, but your ears remain alert, and what you hear next isn't gossip, it's intelligence. Someone references Mrs. Arkwright's difficulties, a euphemism whispered like cologne. Another speaks of a girl dispatched to her aunt's in the countryside for several months, and then they transition to treatments. Quietly, carefully, dill water, pennyroyal tea. A woman in Deptford who can handle things with gentle hands and no inquiries. You continue stitching, steady, concentrated. They believe you're just the girl in the corner, but you're absorbing. You always are. The room grows warmer as the fire settles into a low, consistent glow. Teacups clink delicately. Embroidery hoops transfer from lap to lap, and the conversation, still wrapped in polite embroidery itself, begins to fray at the seams. "Naturally," says the woman with the lemon-coloured shawl, adjusting her spectacles, "one must exercise caution, that sort of knowledge in the wrong hands." She doesn't complete the thought. You glance up without raising your head. Her fingers work with practised fluency, threading pale silk through muslin, but her voice is reduced just enough to signal seriousness. She isn't cautioning, she's protecting access. They fall quiet for an instant, and then, in the kind of tone women employ when pretending they aren't instigating trouble, another asks, "Have you ever known someone to actually visit that woman in Deptford?" Lady Clara doesn't respond right away. She draws her needle through a spray of green thread, deliberate and controlled. Then, only once. The room becomes slightly stiller, not scandalized, intrigued. "She never returned the same," Lady Clara adds. They all nod, not critically, almost worshipfully, as if discussing a saint who survived suffering. You continue stitching. A curl of red thread in the sampler drifts slightly off path. You guide it back with your needle's tip. They don't realise that the girl they're discussing lived in the house adjacent to yours, back when you maintained a home of your own. She used to sing to herself while hanging laundry. Then one day she was absent. Your mother claimed she'd gone to visit her cousin up north, but the neighbour girls whispered alternative things. Deptford, Pennyroyal. A house with curtains that never parted. You never encountered her again. Now the circle of ladies lean closer again, voices hushed. One extracts a folded scrap of paper from her handbag. "A recipe," she says, "inherited from an aunt who once resided on the continent." You can barely discern the words. Juniper, ginger root. They exchange knowledge like contraband silk. They whisper, as though fearful of being detected, but you're positioned right there. They presume you can't read, or won't comprehend, or understand your place too thoroughly to ever mention it. But you do read, you do comprehend, and you retain everything. One of them laughs quietly. If men only understood what gets sewn along with the hems. Lady Clara glances at you, and for the briefest instant her face shifts. Not remorse, not compassion, something more ancient, recognition, as if perhaps once before the marriage, before the gowns, she was a girl who listened from the corner too. You finish your sampler, white thread on white fabric, barely detectable unless held to the light. You present it, and nobody remarks. They don't require to. That's not your purpose here. You pack the basket again, fold the remnants, stack the hoops, and stand. When Lady Clara rises, she thanks the hostess with a kiss on the cheek. You thank her with a nod. Outside, the wind has intensified. The walk home is freezing, your hands numb beneath the linen gloves. Lady Clara says nothing until you approach the gate. Then, as you move to unlatch it, she stops and speaks, without facing you. "You didn't hear anything tonight, did you?" You glance at her briefly, then look elsewhere. "No, my lady," you say, because that's how the world functions. The threads that connect women together are powerful, but they are always sewn in silence. It starts with a knock, soft, late, not the kind of knock made with assurance but with urgency, wrapped in lace gloves. You're in the linen room, folding napkins when it occurs. The housemaid locates you and whispers upstairs. Immediately, you rush, wiping your hands on your apron, when you arrive at the nursery landing. The nursemaid is positioned outside a guest room, pale-faced and nervous. She doesn't speak, just pushes the door ajar and nods. Inside, the atmosphere is dense with heat and candle wax. The curtains are pulled, the fireplace is burning low, more for solace than illumination. And on the bed, propped awkwardly against embroidered pillows, lies a girl you don't know, young, ashen, perspiring through her nightdress. Her lips are chewed red. One hand grips the blanket with white knuckles, the other rests across her abdomen. The governess sits next to her, attempting to maintain her voice steady as she wrings out a flannel cloth. When she notices you, her face shifts slightly, not with surprise but with relief. "She's visiting from Bath," she whispers. "Her parents must not know." You nod once. That's all it requires. You've witnessed this before. It's not the first time a girl has appeared too late for questions and too early for formality. Nobody utters the word miscarriage, not here, not in this household. But the scent in the room is sharp and metallic, and the basin next to the bed is partially filled with crimson water. You roll up your sleeves and begin. There are no physicians, no sterilized tools, just you, the governess and the nursemaid. 3 women connected by silence and necessity. You steady the girl's hand. She clutches yours fiercely. It hurts. She gasps. You nod. "I understand." You whisper as you work. Not prayers, not guidance, just presence, just breathing. The governess brings warm water. You clean what can be cleaned, remove what must be removed, and fold a cloth between the girl's knees to absorb what remains. She sobs once, then becomes silent. Her hair adheres to her face in damp curls. Her eyes stare directly ahead. The nursemaid begins to weep. You don't. Not yet. There's a moment when the worst has passed that the room becomes still. Not silent, still, as if the house itself is suspending its breath. You look at the bloodied cloths in the basin. You look at the pale girl on the bed. Then you begin to organise, because that's part of it too. Not just the care, but the concealment. You rinse the cloths in silence, one by one. The water shifts pink, then red, then clear again. The governess burns the bloodied sheets in the hearth, feeding them in gradually, like letters she wishes she'd never composed. The girl on the bed has drifted into a shallow sleep, her breathing shallow, one arm curved over her belly like a damaged wing. Nobody utters a word, because there is no script for this. You clean the basin, fold a fresh cloth beneath her legs, check the pulse at her neck, not because you're trained, but because instinct directs you to. It's there, faint, steady, like the beat of a thread pulling through muslin. The governess stands, smoothing her skirt. "I'll compose a note," she says. "State she became ill from the train journey. Exhaustion or something appropriate." The nursemaid doesn't respond. She's still staring at the ashes in the fireplace. You gently guide her from the room. Sometimes it's not the one in the bed who requires carrying. In the corridor, she finally speaks. She's just a child. You nod, because she's no more than 16, with a hair ribbon still fastened to her collar. She didn't require a punishment. She required an escape. But in houses such as these, there are only ways through. You descend to the washing area and dispose of the water behind the coal container, where nobody will observe the stains in the drain. You bury the used cloths beneath the soot pile. In several days, they'll be burned. You return to your room, smelling faintly of vinegar and blood, but nobody will inquire why. The following morning, the girl is absent. No carriage, no trunk, no farewell. Just her room, stripped and prepared. Her name doesn't appear in the guest register. Nobody mentions her at breakfast, not even Lady Clara, who stirs her tea as if she hasn't just erased a life. But you understand better. You observed her, held her hand, heard the truth. Her silence screamed. That afternoon you pass by the governess on the rear stairs. She doesn't speak, But as you pass, she reaches out briefly and presses something into your palm. A strip of cloth folded into a square inside. "A coin," she whispered. "Thank you," the governess murmurs, already halfway down the next step. You hold the coin in your hand for a prolonged moment. It's small, thin, but heavier than it appears. You wrap it in a handkerchief and tuck it deep into your pocket. Not for the money, for the memory. Because in this house, stories such as hers aren't documented, but they are remembered by women like you. You're summoned to the carriage entrance. Late the following morning, the weather's terrible again. Wind scraping through the stables, rain threatening at the edge of grey sky. Lady Clara emerges from the front entrance dressed in a travelling cloak and her finest gloves. A lace veil drawn loosely across her face. She's heading out for her weekly charity visit and you're to escort her. Not for companionship, obviously. For carrying bundles. You fall into step behind her, 2 paces back, with a wicker hamper in your arms, packed with preserves, barley candy, sewing needles, and bundles of aged linen. It's all been organised to appear generous, though none of it would sustain a family for more than a day. Still, it's more than most receive. The carriage jolts on uneven cobblestones as you rattle through the edge of town and into the poorer lanes where fog adheres low to the windowsills. Here the houses are hunched, shoulders tight, chimneys leaning like elderly men. The children watch as the carriage passes, mud up to their knees, noses dripping, bare toes gripping stones. You look away before your expression betrays you. Lady Clara doesn't look out at all. She fans herself and speaks casually about last week's recital. The carriage halts outside a cottage with a damaged gate and a slate roof patched with tar fabric. You climb down first, sheltering the basket under your shawl as the wind kicks up. The vicar is already present. He greets Lady Clara with a bow and you with a look. You follow them into the cottage, ducking slightly under the warped lintel. The inside smells of boiled cabbage and cold stone. A woman sits in a chair by the hearth, feet wrapped in cloth, eyes hollowed and bloodshot. Her husband is absent, likely labouring or gone completely. A child peers from behind a curtain, thin as a sparrow, a crust of something on his cheek. Lady Clara sets her gloves on the side table, as if it's her own drawing room. She offers the woman a tight smile and says something about Christian strength. You keep your eyes lowered and unpack the basket. 1 jar of preserves, 1 roll of flannel, 1 pair of repaired boots from the donation pile. Insufficient, not nearly. You glance at the woman again. Her hands shake slightly as she lifts the jar. Her eyes communicate. Thank you, but her shoulders communicate this is a performance she's enacted before. Lady Clara converses a bit longer. Then, as if bored, she stands and adjusts her veil. She leaves behind a signed card from the Ladies' Relief Committee and sweeps out the door. You pause. Then you take a heel of bread from your apron pocket, your own. You divide it in half and place it next to the boots on the hearth. The woman doesn't look up, but she knows. You step out into the wind again, the rain finally falling in earnest. The vicar says something to Lady Clara about devotion. She says something in return about sacrifice. You pull your shawl tighter and follow them to the carriage, water soaking through your shoes. Nobody says thank you. Not to you. Back in the carriage, Lady Clara shakes her veil free of raindrops and sighs as though she's just emerged from a battlefield rather than a 2-room cottage. It's so essential to witness these things with one's own eyes, she says, though her gaze never departs from her gloved hands. It provides one perspective. You sit across from her on the folding bench, clutching the now empty basket, wet hems clinging to your ankles. You nod. Not because you concur, but because you're not supposed to do anything else. She continues, speaking more to herself than to you. There's such virtue in humility. Those women are so appreciative. It reminds me how privileged we are. You could speak up if you had the nerve. You could mention that the woman in that little house seemed more exhausted than thankful, that her quiet wasn't acceptance, it was weariness shaped into something resembling contentment. But you stay silent. Rain beats a steady rhythm against the carriage top. Beyond the window, a laundress in a drenched apron drags a sloshing bucket toward her threshold. Her infant wails. From somewhere out of view, a hound yaps. Smoke drifts from a deteriorating chimney stack. Lady Clara clicks her tongue at the odour. Really, I can't fathom how they manage in such conditions. You understand? You lived it? And occasionally, when the breeze cuts through the attic rafters just so, you still live it. When you get back to the estate, Lady Clara heads straight for the parlour, tossing her wet gloves onto a seat like they've offended her. You're dismissed to clean and put away the hamper. No acknowledgement, no second look, just the familiar presumption that whatever you hold vanishes once it's served its purpose. But before you make it to the washroom, you encounter the housekeeper, who notices your waterlogged shoes and the jam stain on your front. "Go change," she says, not harsh, before the footmen spot you. You nod, thankful for the reprieve. Upstairs, you squeeze out your stockings and collapse onto the narrow bed for a breath, arms limp. That evening, while sweeping the library carpets, you discover a torn piece of paper wedged in the cushions. It's a fragment of a sermon ripped from a leaflet, maybe just a single line, hardly readable in smudged ink. "Let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth." You fold it away, tuck it in your pocket, and keep quiet. Because the real charity in this household is the kind that goes unspoken. Not through words, but through warm loaves, a fixed shoe, a patient hush, and sometimes, just sometimes, through the simple gesture of remaining long enough to recall a name. The passage near the rear staircase is heavy with the smell of furniture polish and damp fabric. You're crouched in the corner with a pile of lace collars spread across your lap, repairing the delicate pieces that have worn thin at the edges. They don't belong to this estate. These are extras commissioned privately by a seamstress in town who compensates in cash and confidentiality. You labour by lamplight, hunched low to avoid detection. Your fingers understand this pattern better than your own penmanship. Stitch, flip, catch the thread, fold, continue, silent. Work exchanged for pocket coins that won't be noticed and can't be discovered. A floorboard creaks behind you and you tense, then ease. It's just Agnes, the upstairs housemaid. She props herself against the wall and pulls something from her apron, a small bundle. When she unwraps it, you notice a row of miniature bonnets constructed from leftover scraps of lace and fine cotton. They're intricate, ridiculous, and honestly, stunning. "She's allowing me to sell these now," Agnes murmurs. The seamstress by the crossing says, "If I produce 6 weekly, she'll pay enough for decent boots by Christmas." You grin. "Just keep them from the housekeeper's sight." Agnes smirks and nods, already understanding. You both return to your tasks. 2 young women stitching aspirations nobody else comprehends. Later, you deliver your lace to the kitchen entrance where the butcher's helper waits for his payment. You pass him a package wrapped in brown paper and secured with twine. He doesn't probe. He's been compensated to transport items, not question them. The coins arrive 3 days afterward, concealed beneath the butcher's invoice. You slip them into a crease in your pillowcase, deep behind the fabric. You count them once, twice, not for the amount, but for the cadence. These aren't earnings, they're endurance. You don't waste the money on decorative ribbons or cosmetics. You invest it in needles, thread, and occasionally, when the bruising on your heel worsens, a bit of camphor from the druggist. You purchase tin fasteners in quantity and collect scraps of felt for patching. You master doing without long before you ever learn to request. Tonight you remain awake, late, completing one final collar, delicate, scalloped, intended for a lady who won't learn your name. As you labour, you hear the clock chime midnight down in the parlour. You complete the final loop and tie off the thread. Then you reach under the loose plank near your bed and extract a bundle wrapped in aged muslin. Inside are 3 collars, 2 lace cuffs, 1 small purse containing coins, and your name embroidered in crimson thread on the interior of each. Not for display, not for commerce, but so that somewhere in existence, even if nobody else recalls, you will. The following morning, frost patterns the window panes in intricate crystals, lacework sketched by winter's touch. You wake before the bells, the attic still frigid enough to make your breathing visible. Beneath your pillow, the little coin purse remains there. You press your palm to it briefly, just to sense the substance. Today is market day, and while you won't attend, your handiwork will. Agnes crosses your path in the corridor, apron crammed with completed baby bonnets. You meet her gaze and she offers a slight nod, victorious. She's attached a ruffle to one this time. A gamble. A trademark. Below, in the warmth of the washroom, the cook is shouting instructions for broths and desserts, but your assignment waits in the pantry. You arrange jars by mass, inspect seals, and quietly repair a rip in the flour bag with a spare piece of linen. Nobody will detect it was damaged. That's the intention. Afterward, while buffing brass in the parlour, you overhear Lady Clara discussing the latest trend in lace collars. Larger, more scalloped. She mentions this with a wrinkled nose, but you observe she continues flipping through the catalogue pages, regardless. Perhaps next week she'll place an order. Perhaps next week it will be yours. That evening, by lamplight, you retrieve your hidden muslin bundle again, not for labour, but for strategizing. You've included one more collar. This one bears small, nearly invisible initials stitched near the seam. Not yours. A companion's, Agnes's. A type of signature, a type of resistance, because this isn't merely sewing, it's a blueprint. Each piece you craft is a thread drawn towards something beyond these boundaries. A stall in the marketplace, a room of your own. Sufficient coins to select when you labour, not whether. Enough fabric to stitch a name people acknowledge. Perhaps not loudly, but quietly, permanently. Your hands ache, but the soreness feels transformed now, like intention, not penalty. You fold the new collar carefully and add it to the collection beneath the floorboard. Then you settle back, listening to the house groan and exhale around you, its frame adjusting for the night. Somewhere a bell sounds faintly. An infant stirs. A window bangs shut. Life persists. But under this roof, beneath all the laced borders and polished silverware, a dozen secret economies thrive. Small rebellions wrapped in muslin, sewn into seams, concealed in hems. And you. You're not merely surviving them. You're stitching your exit, one thread at a time. The widow resides 3 doors from the grocer in a brick dwelling with ivy choking the eaves and a fractured bell cord. Nobody uses it anymore. You've walked past it countless times on errands, always noticing how still it appears, how the drapes never quite shut, but nobody ever signals from them either. This morning the housekeeper dispatches you there with a bundle. 2 repaired waistcoats, freshly ironed, you're instructed. The widow performs fine needlework and occasional mending for the household in exchange for coal and biscuits. A reserved woman, the housekeeper mentions. Dependable, doesn't probe. You grasp the language. She's valuable. The air is bitter as you walk. Wind sneaking down the collar of your dress. You carry the bundle wrapped in brown paper, one hand buried in your apron for warmth. The town is starting to wake. Shop barriers creak open. A coal wagon rumbles past. Someone is already scolding a child for tracking dirt. You turn onto her street and tap gently at her entrance. It opens a crack. A pallid face looks out. Late middle years, eyes keen despite the shadows beneath them. She notices the bundle and nods. No speech, just moves aside. You follow her inside. The dwelling smells of lavender, candle wax, and something faintly metallic. There's no fire burning, only a stub of a candle flickering near the mending basket. She motions to a chair, and you sit while she opens the bundle with deliberate fingers. "The stitching's solid," she says eventually, voice low and gravelly. "Someone from upstairs?" You pause, then nod. She nods in return. "I did shirts for the previous master once before his lungs failed him." You wait. There's something present, something beneath the surface of her speech, like thread drawn too tight in a seam. Her hands move steadily, folding, examining. Then she reaches under the table and extracts a box. Inside is work. Exquisite, challenging work. Embroidery, lace additions, hand-repaired cuffs so refined they could pass for unworn. But none of it bears labels. None of it is sold, just stacked neatly in muslin. You can't resist, you whisper. "Why not sell these?" She doesn't glance at you. "I tried once. Had my name on the receipt. Gentleman who purchased it said his wife couldn't wear something stitched by a craftswoman. Said it felt improper. You comprehend?" You ask if she requires assistance. She pauses, then regards you. Skilled with buttonholes you are. So you remain for 2 hours. The two of you labour in silence. She demonstrates how to double back the thread on velvet without bunching the fabric. You show her how to strengthen a frayed seam with invisible stitches. When you stand to depart, she presses something into your palm. A needle. But not just any needle. One with a curved tip, uncommon and hard to acquire, meant for gloves, meant for delicate curved seams. Nobody observes, but everyone senses. "Try it," she says. You nod. Outside, the frost has thawed, but your hands remain chilled. Still, when you reach the house again, you tuck the needle inside your pocket like treasure. Because the widow may not sell her name anymore, but she's just offered you a fragment of it. That evening you sit cross-legged on your bed beneath the low rafters of the attic, the little glove needle resting beside you like a sacred object. You turn it between your fingers once, twice, then thread it with precision. The widow's technique replays in your mind. How she looped the thread just so, how she steadied the fabric with a curved palm, how her fingers barely shifted but the outcome was flawless. You attempt it on a scrap of leather, an old glove cuff you've preserved for months, hoping one day you'd learn how to repair it. The stitches curve, slow and clumsy at first, then smoother, then neater. By the 5th attempt, you're beginning to grasp it, not just the motion, but the purpose behind it. You're not just repairing, you're transforming. Below, the house groans softly in its rest. Wind knocks at the windows, and the coals in the stove crackle down to embers. Everyone else is tucked into their own small rituals. Cook with her ledger, the governess with her ink-stained fingers, the nursemaid humming half lullabies into the baby's curls. But up here in your slice of shadow, you're constructing something that doesn't belong to anyone else. A new pair of gloves sits beside you. Well, not new. Stained, fraying, starting to split at the seams left behind in the donation box meant for the poorhouse. Never claimed. You rescued them. Not for pity, for possibility. You begin reinforcing the thumbs, using the curved needle now like an extension of yourself. The thread glides smooth through the worn leather and the stitches hold firm, clean, invisible. You smile just slightly. By the time you finish, the gloves have been altered. Not perfect, no, but sturdier. Ready. You wrap them in a cloth and tuck them beneath your bed. You're saving them for Agnes. Her boots may arrive by Christmas, but her fingers won't survive through November without warmth. And these could pass for new. And that's the secret, isn't it? The entire world believes it operates on what's new, what's whole, what's costly. But you know differently. It operates on what's mended, what's hidden, what's salvaged. In the quiet before sleep, you pull the muslin-wrapped bundle of collars from beneath the floorboard. You include a note this time. Not a name, not yet. just a symbol you've sewn into the edge of the glove cuff, a kind of signature, not one that anyone will identify now, but maybe someday they will. You extinguish your candle, the smoke curling like a ribbon into the rafters. In the darkness, the house breathes. So do you, and somewhere in your chest something stirs that feels a little like ownership. The lamp burns dim in the governess's chamber tonight. You pass by her open entrance on your way to return a folded tablecloth and notice her hunched over a stack of papers, lips pressed, fingers ink-stained. She doesn't notice you, or maybe she does and just opts not to glance up. You hesitate, then knock just once. She looks up, startled, then sighs. Oh, it's you. You step in lightly, careful not to let your shadow fall across her desk. Her chamber is smaller than yours somehow, though her position sits higher on the household hierarchy. The wallpaper peels at the corners. The only luxury is a small writing desk crowded with books, lesson plans, and a battered oil lamp that flickers with every draft. I didn't mean to interrupt you, you say. No, stay. I could use your perspective. She pushes a page toward you. It's a letter, neatly penned with just a few crossed lines, but the name at the bottom catches your breath. F. Ashcroft Esquire. She observes you carefully. I'm submitting it under his name, she says. It's the only method they'll publish it. You glance again at the text. It's not a story, it's a column. Brief, direct, clever advice on managing difficult pupils with just enough wit to make it seem light-hearted. It's brilliant. You feel it in your chest. I've written 5, she continues. 3 were accepted. No compensation yet, of course, but it's something. You nod. You don't trust your voice just now. She takes a sip of tea gone cold and leans back in her chair. Her expression transforms, less exhausted, more defiant. When I was 17, she says, I wanted to write for the Times. My uncle said I'd do better, learning to play the pianoforte and smile, so I wrote under his initials instead. She reaches into a drawer and extracts a thin booklet. Inside, printed on cheap paper, are brief essays and stories. Some are marked only FA, others anonymous. She flips to one. The Cost of Silence in a House of Noise. You read the opening line. Some women speak through the way they fold linen, others in the thread they choose to mend a cuff. You meet her eyes. You understand, she says softly. I think there are more of us than they realise. You nod again. She smiles, tight, genuine, then gestures to a stack of blank paper on the corner of her desk. If you ever feel like writing something, she says, my door is unlocked after supper. You don't respond, not with words, but you reach out, touch the corner of the page, and feel something in yourself shift. Because this house may only recognise you as hands, but here in this quiet, ink-stained chamber, you are voice. You depart the governess's chamber with your mind still buzzing, not from the oil fumes or the candlelight, but from the sensation of possibility. It follows you down the servants' corridor like a hum beneath your skin. You've been surrounded by unspoken things for so long that hearing someone articulate it, write it, feels like air after drowning. Back in your attic corner, you light your own stub of candle and pull a worn piece of linen from the bottom of your basket. Not for mending, this time for writing. You don't have paper, but you've learned that words can adhere to any surface if the meaning is strong enough. You sharpen a stub of pencil with your sewing scissors. The tip splinters, but it holds. Then slowly, carefully, you write. What if the most powerful women are the ones nobody sees? It looks strange, your own thought in your own hand. You fold the cloth, slide it into the lining of your stays. Nobody will discover it there. It's yours. Over the following nights, you return to the governess's chamber, not as a servant, but as a conspirator. She makes weak tea and offers you scraps of paper torn from the backs of old ledgers. You bring her your best sentences, born from hours of quiet thinking while scrubbing grates or hemming sleeves. You write about the patterns of conversation in the parlour, how a woman can be both praised and diminished in a single compliment. You write about Agnes's baby bonnets, about the widow with the glove needle, about the girl who vanished after the accident. No names, just truths. The governess reads them with a finger resting gently on her chin. Sometimes she smiles, sometimes she winces, always she nods. You've got rhythm, she tells you once, tapping the paper like a piano key. It's in your stitching, too. No surprise. One evening, she slides a fresh envelope across the desk. You choose the name, she says. We'll submit it together. Your heart stutters. You think of a dozen names that aren't yours, then settle on one that is almost a memory from your grandmother, a pet name your sister once gave you, something quiet, something safe. The letter is mailed 2 days later, slipped into the outgoing mail with the household bills and society invitations. Nobody notices. Nobody ever does. But that evening, when you climb into bed, the air feels different. You're still in the attic, still a servant, still invisible to most of the household. But somewhere out there, your words are travelling through the world, folded in paper, inked in your rhythm, signed with your ghost. You sleep with your hand over your ribs, where the linen scrap is hidden, not because you fear losing it, but because it's the first thing that ever truly belonged to you. You don't descend to breakfast the following morning. You claim you're unwell, and in truth you are, though not with fever, nor with chills, nor even the usual exhaustion that settles in your bones like ash. You're sick of the burden, of the roles, of the hours spent tightening stays and sewing hems and saying yes ma'am to girls who weep behind locked doors but won't meet your eye in daylight. So you remain in bed, just for today. You wrap your shawl around your shoulders, light the candle, and curl under the attic eaves where the wind whistles through a crack in the bricks. You hold the linen scrap in your hand, your writing from last night, softening with handling. You think about what you've written and what you haven't yet dared to. The thing is, you could do this every day. Not just stitch, not just serve, but refuse quietly. Refuse to rise, refuse to answer the bell, refuse to make yourself small for someone else's comfort. You lie back, close your eyes, and pretend for a full 10 minutes that you are sickly, fragile, unfit for duty. It's surprisingly easy. When the housemaid comes up to check on you, you cough gently and say your head hurts. She offers you a bowl of broth. You thank her. She doesn't ask questions. She's done the same before, you realise, taken to bed with no cause but the need to be left alone. You sip slowly, the warmth spreading through your belly. Outside the window, pigeons flutter past the rooftops. Chimneys belch their grey smoke. The bells continue to ring. Without you, the world turns, and it doesn't collapse. By midday, the ache behind your eyes fades, not because it's gone, but because it's rested. You stretch under the thin blanket and let the hours slip by. You nap. You reread your scraps. You mend nothing, cook nothing, dress nobody. You do nothing productive, and still the house carries on. When twilight falls, you rise and dress slowly, fingers moving without rush. You brush your hair in silence. You look into the cracked mirror nailed to the attic wall, and for the first time in weeks, your face doesn't look hollow, it looks defiant. Downstairs, the cook mutters about you missing the silver polishing. The housekeeper makes a note in her ledger, but nobody scolds you, nobody sends you away, because women here do fall ill sometimes, and sometimes they're not ill at all. They're tired of the script. You return to your bed that night with something new inside you, a sliver of rebellion, sharp, quiet, and utterly your own. You've always followed the rules, but now you understand how it feels to step outside the frame, even just for a day, and the next time someone calls you strong, you'll smile because they don't know your greatest strength isn't what you endure, it's what you choose not to do. The following morning you return to your duties, not because guilt claws at you or because someone made a threat, but because the choice is yours now. The act of stepping away, even briefly, has rewritten something deep in your bones. You no longer move from obligation alone. You move because you decide to, and with that shift, the work feels different. You polish the banister slower, noticing how the wood grain swirls like water. You fold linen with an extra crease, not for the mistress, but for your own sense of control. You answer bells, yes, but with a gaze that holds just a bit longer. Not insolence, just presence. At midday you see Clara, the kitchen maid, staring blankly at the ash bucket. Her apron is streaked with soot and her hands are red and raw. You tap her shoulder and nod toward the scullery. 10 minutes, you say. I've got the rest. She hesitates, then disappears without a word. You don't explain yourself to cook. You just rinse the pail and keep moving. And for the first time you feel the quiet power in stepping into someone else's stillness. Because rest doesn't have to be hoarded. It can be shared. That evening in the attic, the governess knocks. Unusual for her. You open the door and she holds out a letter. Her face is unreadable. You take it carefully. The envelope is pale blue, the script unfamiliar. Inside, your article, printed, typeset, inked. It's there, your words, your rhythm. A different name at the bottom, of course, but the voice is yours. The governess doesn't speak. She just watches. You read the first line aloud and your hands don't tremble. When you're done, she leaves. You stand there for a while, holding the letter like it might dissolve. The candle flickers low. The chamber is quiet, and you begin to understand something. Not every act of defiance needs to be loud. Some rebellions live in rest days, some in borrowed pens, some in shared silence between women who've been told to stay small. The world might never know what you've done, but your body knows. Your voice knows. And somewhere out there, someone is reading your words tonight, not knowing who you are, not knowing how you wrote them. In the attic of a grand house, with tired hands and a bent back and a name that wasn't your own, but the truth was yours more than that name. You always were. You always will be. You didn't intend to become the one they whispered about, but somehow you did. It begins with a glance in the laundry room. A scullery girl asks if it's true that you missed a day and didn't get wages docked. You don't answer. You just smile and keep folding sheets. Later, the upstairs maid lingers beside you in the hall and mutters, "I heard about your writing." She doesn't say more. You don't confirm, but something passes between you, a thread of recognition. One by one, the whispers grow legs. They don't come with scorn. They come with curiosity, admiration even. You haven't changed your uniform. You haven't spoken out, and yet your presence has shifted. And now you begin to notice them too. The parlourmaid who carries a sketchbook in her apron. The laundry girl who mutters poetry while she scrubs. The cook's assistant who hums opera beneath her breath when nobody listens. They've all been doing it in secret, tucked away where no one's watching, same as you. One night on the back stairs you discover a piece of paper wedged into the railing. It's a poem, rough around the edges, tender, likely Clara's doing. Later a charcoal drawing of the butler looking sour shows up folded in with the dish towels. That's got to be Alice's work. The girls in the attic are leaving signs and you join in. You tuck one of your pieces into the banister's hollow, slip a line from a letter under a tea tin, scribble a verse about chamber pots and the housekeeper's snoring that sends the kitchen girls into fits when they discover it. It becomes a ritual, a game, resistance without a label. It grows. Before long, even Agnes starts checking under the stairs for something funny or a bit of verse. She doesn't mention it, but you spot her grinning once while you're hauling coal to the sitting room, and that tells you plenty. The governess starts leaving ink for you. Tiny offerings show up after dark. A ribbon for your hair, a polished pebble, a scrap of silk thread. Nothing costly, everything precious. The attic isn't just a room to collapse in anymore. It's a bulletin board, a place to confess, a realm built from fragments and hidden things. You never planned to guide it, but you're here now, and for the first time ever, the notion of guiding others doesn't feel like control or consequence. It feels like being trusted, like breathing together in shadowed spaces, like protection not from the world, but from facing it alone. You're sweeping the front hall one morning when Mrs. Graham, the housekeeper, appears beside you. Her hands are folded tight, her eyes dim under her bonnet's edge. She glances down, then clears her throat. There's ink smudged on the back stairway. "Fabric," she says, once more. You get ready for a scolding. You've been cautious always, cleaning nibs, blotting carefully, but perhaps someone else slipped up. Maybe Agnes finally took a chance with her poem. You start to respond, but she doesn't give you the chance. "I'm not inquiring," she says. "I'm warning you to take more care." Then quieter, so quiet you nearly miss it, she adds. "But don't quit," and she turns away. You stand there rigid, broom gripped in your hands, and the tall clock ticks somewhere behind you. A maid sweeps past, humming the melody from that mocking lullaby you left upstairs in the storage room. You hear a bell chime, but nobody runs for it. Everyone's waiting for something different now. Later that night in the attic, the scraps are there waiting. 3 fresh ones. One shows a woman gripping a quill like it's a blade. Another is a recipe scrawled in riddles. The third, no signature, just one line. Even trapped birds hold memory of flight. You don't weep, but something catches in your throat. You spend the following hour writing, not for the world this time, but for the attic. You write for those who'll read by pale moonlight beneath covers after shifts that stretch 14 hours. Presents. You write for hands that throb, minds that drift, feet that shuffle without sound but imagine in brilliant shades. This house isn't only a place of toil now. It's a breathing record of buried desires, of murmured truths, of women who kept creating things, even when the world wanted to still their hands. And it reaches beyond just this house. The footman from the neighbouring estate delivers a folded message. A relative's cook sends information. The governess's sister works at a girls' academy in Leeds and has started gathering unsigned verses from servants with fire in them. It's expanding. It always held the strength to. All it required was an opening in the barrier, and you, without fully realising it, became that opening. Not because you yelled, but because you refused to stay silent where it counted. The ink-stained fabric, the rhyme about spoiled fruit, the story hidden inside a jar of preserves. These aren't mistakes. They're an uprising. And though you're still summoned by a bell, still rest on a narrow bed, still respond to names that aren't yours, you grasp the reality. You've built something larger than this house, and it's barely started. You walk out into the fresh morning, frost still clinging to the metal railing, the sky the shade of china. You've woken early, even by your standards, but not for duties this time, not to clean or repair or sew. You're going to the postal office. The letter tucked in your apron pocket is wrinkled from too many readings. It's addressed to someone you've never encountered, Ms. C, who operates a modest school in a town up north and has written through a borrowed contact, wondering if the attic girls could send more verses. She mentions her pupils have started circulating them, transcribing them, reciting them out loud. She names them the attic teachings. You nearly chuckle at that. Teachings, as if the joke about the master's hairpiece or the tribute to cleaning soap could be holy, but perhaps in their way they are. You drop the letter into the red mailbox and let out your breath. There. Done. When you get back, the house is stirring. Boots thunder on stone. The cook is hollering already about the delivery boy running behind. The rear hallway carries the scent of coal and baked bread. It ought to feel like falling back into habit. But something shifted, because now you move through this house like someone who understands its every flaw and mystery. Not just the plumbing oddities or which panes shake in wind, but the invisible web of hands, thoughts and joy woven under the surface. You stop in the upstairs corridor where the governess walks by carrying her bag. "Have you seen the newest?" she asks, casual-like. You nod. "It's a strong one," you say quietly. "I enjoyed the part about the brass clasps." She grins. "That came from me." It's silent again, but not hollow. Throughout the house hums with mutual knowing. Below, the kitchen girl hums while she shines silverware. An old melody, but the beat now holds what you penned in the laundry room. Girls communicate in signals. Put the starch next to the citrus, which you recognise means there's a fresh one hidden in the third compartment. Even Agnes, surprisingly, has quit complaining about foolish writers. She passes you a pair of gloves one afternoon, wool, slightly used, cosy. "I made them too tight," she says firmly. "Could suit you," you reply. "Thank you. But you understand they were intended for you all along." You start to write more, not from anguish or isolation, but from happiness. It's not merely release now, it's building something, it's leaving something behind. The attic has transformed into a kind of printing house, a place where ink and cloth and laughter and honesty converge. One night, someone tacks a line over the wash basin. We don't whisper from fear. We whisper because it carries farther. And suddenly, everything you've constructed makes sense. You haven't only created a space to get through, you've created a method to last and to resonate. The house is still tonight, not the typical silence of a late hour with clocks ticking and distant breathing. This is the silence of finishing, of something falling into its proper place. You rest on your thin cot in the attic, gazing at the angled beams overhead. The moonlight carves a narrow silver stripe across the ceiling. Outside, the city rests, or attempts to. Somewhere beyond these walls, someone else is writing by flickering light. You sense it. Beside you, hidden under your blanket, is a sewn collection of pages. Every fragment, every verse, every sketch, a testament to the women who existed here, not merely laboured here, but existed, their wit, their fury, their gentleness, their cleverness. And your voice threaded through all of it like yarn through fabric. Earlier this afternoon, the lady of the house gave you an envelope, slender, pale. A woman across town is searching for someone to help in her fresh lending library. She requested someone who reads. The lady said, "I considered you. You didn't agree. Not right away, but you didn't refuse either, because now you possess choices, not liberty in the sweeping sense, but room. A grip, a threshold you helped open with nothing more than paper and ink and bravery you didn't know existed in you. Beyond the attic window, a star flickers. Inside, the others rest around you, Clara mumbling in dreams, Alice folded like a kitten, and at the distant corner, a new girl, reserved, timid, with a piece of chalk in her apron pocket. You noticed her sketching a bird on the basement wall. She's unaware yet that you noticed, but she'll learn. She'll discover your note in the morning, "Welcome to the attic," and she'll reply. Because now this isn't only a place where things are survived, it's a place where things are preserved and handed down, even if the world beyond never witnesses it, even if the past erases the names. You won't, and she won't either. The house settles into stillness. You adjust beneath your blanket, the night folding around you like gentle fabric. The air is crisp, but not harsh. Somewhere down below, the embers in the kitchen stove are dimming and the final sounds of footsteps have faded long ago. Everyone is at peace now. Everyone except you. You rest quietly, listening to the attic's rhythm. It's not merely timber and particles anymore, it's something beyond, something alive. A tender quiet that contains every whisper, every concealed verse, every hint of laughter exchanged in private. You think of the ink marks on your fingers, the small smile Agnes offered you, the bird sketched in chalk. These minor things, so readily dismissed, somehow held more significance than the most elegant speeches or richest fabrics. And that's the understanding you hold with you now, that genuine power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it writes, sometimes it sings, sometimes it moves quietly from one weary hand to another, declaring, "I notice you, I acknowledge you, you have worth." Beyond, the sky starts to transform. Not dawn yet, but approaching. The stars pulse slower. The world is preparing to rotate once more. But you're not hurrying anywhere tonight. You've deserved your peace. So, take a deep breath. Let the stillness embrace you. And understand, even in the most hidden spaces, beyond the thickest doors, there is always a flame. One that waits for you. One that's yours to hold.